Especially for you, my dear, Cynthia Harris said, with a smile that seemed almost too bright as she placed the steaming mug in front of me. Her voice was sugary sweet, like honey masking something darker beneath. I forced a smile, though my stomach twisted. So sweet, I replied, keeping my tone light. I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my palms, but something wasn't right. The scent rising from the cup wasn't the familiar, comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Instead, there was an odd, almost chemical tang, something metallic that lingered at the back of my throat even before I took a sip. Across from me, James Thompson barely acknowledged my presence, his gaze locked on his phone, one arm casually draped over the back of his chair, the usual arrogance radiating off of him, filling the space between us. "Drink up," Cynthia chirped, her eyes twinkling. "I made it just the way you like it." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. She had never bothered to care how I liked my coffee. For 7 years, I'd sat at this table, enduring her constant belittling, her veiled insults, and her suffocating control over James. She'd always been the quiet puppet master, subtly pulling the strings in my marriage, reinforcing James's belief that he was superior to me, that I should be grateful for him, that he was doing me a favor by being with me. And James? He thrived on her approval. A golden boy in her eyes, he could do no wrong while I was the outsider, someone who could never quite measure up. My fingers tightened around the mug. I glanced at James, but he didn't even notice the way his mother's gaze flicked toward my cup, or the faint tension in her jaw as she waited. Why was she watching so closely? Then the memory hit me. This wasn't the first time something had seemed off with what she'd given me. 2 months ago, after a family dinner, I spent the entire night curled up on the bathroom floor, my stomach cramping violently. Cynthia had played the concerned mother-in-law role to perfection, pretending to care. "Maybe you have a sensitive stomach, dear. Perhaps you should watch what you eat." James had rolled his eyes and blamed me for ruining the evening with my drama. Another time, I'd felt a strange dizziness after having tea at her house, my head spinning, my body sluggish. Cynthia had patted my hand with false sympathy. "Oh dear, maybe you're just dehydrated." James had laughed, teasing me for not being able to handle a simple cup of tea. But now, she was watching me too closely, waiting too intently. My heartbeat quickened as my mind raced. What was in this coffee? Cynthia's lips twitched slightly, her expression perfectly neutral, but I could tell. She wanted me to drink it. She expected me to drink it. I took a quiet, steadying breath before shifting my mug closer to James's seat, leaning forward to appear absorbed in my phone. My fingers wrapped around the handle of his coffee cup instead, and in one smooth, deliberate motion, I switched the mugs. The ceramic barely made a sound against the tablecloth, my movements practiced and careful. I had learned how to survive in this house by staying vigilant. James didn't notice. He was still lost in his phone, his indifference unwavering. I picked up the mug meant for him and took a slow sip. Black, no sugar, just the way he always drank it. James finally lifted the mug Cynthia had placed in front of me and took a sip without even a second thought. Cynthia's smile faltered. Just for a moment, a flicker of panic, fear, and shock flashing in her eyes before she quickly masked it with her usual pleasant expression. James, oblivious as always, set the mug down, completely unaware that his fate had been sealed with a single, casual sip. I watched. I waited. James sighed, rubbing his temple, his usual arrogance still firmly in place as he scrolled through his phone. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second since his first sip passing by. Cynthia's eyes darted to him every few moments, her fingers gripping the edge of the tablecloth tightly. She wasn't watching me anymore. Her attention had completely shifted to James. I leaned back, feigning nonchalance, and forced a casual smile as I took another slow sip from James's cup. "Something wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice level. He blinked a few times, rubbing his forehead. "I don't know. I just feel a little off." I took another sip, my pulse steady, my hands relaxed on the table. "Maybe you should drink some water," I suggested, my voice calm. Cynthia's nails dug into the tablecloth. James started to speak, but the words faltered, his sentence cut off as he swallowed hard, shifting in his chair. His face twisted slightly, his jaw clenched, clearly fighting off a sudden wave of nausea. The room grew eerily quiet. Cynthia stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. "James, maybe you should lie down," she said quickly, her voice too quick, too rehearsed, as though she already knew exactly what was happening. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. He groaned softly, shaking his head. "No, His breathing grew heavier, beads of sweat forming along his hairline. His hand trembled as he reached for his water glass, his fingers unsteady. I watched him, the reality sinking in. She knew. She knew something was in that coffee. Cynthia moved quickly, almost too quickly, as if she could somehow physically pull him away from the situation she had orchestrated. "I'll get you something, honey," she said, her voice cracking. "Maybe a cold cloth." She wasn't panicking out of concern for her son. She was panicking because she was losing control. James clenched his jaw, waving her off. "I just need a minute," he muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. I leaned forward, watching Cynthia carefully. "I don't understand," I said, feigning innocence. "James, you just drank the same coffee your mother made for me. If I'm fine, why aren't you?" Cynthia froze, and I could see the blood drain from her face. James, still sluggish, didn't immediately react, but Cynthia's breathing shifted. I don't know," she stammered, her voice losing its usual confidence. "Maybe he's coming down with something." "Coming down with something?" I stared at her, my mind piecing everything together, and a cold dread twisted my stomach. How many times had I heard that excuse over the years? How many nights had I spent curled in pain, my body betraying me, while James and Cynthia watched without a hint of concern? But now it was him. James wiped his face, his movements slow and his skin growing even paler. He muttered something under his breath, then stood up too quickly. The moment he pushed away from the table, his body swayed, unsteady, and his chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stumbled toward the counter, gripping it for balance. "Whoa!" he muttered. "What the hell is going on?" Cynthia was already moving, trying to regain control. "Sweetheart, just sit down. No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Let's call a doctor." Both of them froze. James blinked rapidly, shaking his head. "It's nothing. I just need a second." He didn't even realize how bad it was yet. Cynthia's breathing had become shallow, and now I saw the fear in her eyes, clear and unmistakable. She wasn't just worried. She was caught, and that was when I knew. This wasn't a mistake, a bad batch of coffee, or a coincidence. Cynthia had done something to that drink. And now, James was just beginning to feel the betrayal, the sickness, the confusion creeping through him, just like I had. My heart pounded, but I forced my face to remain calm. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "I'm calling an ambulance," I said. James waved me off again, but I saw it, just a hint of panic in his eyes. He was no longer in control. Cynthia shot forward, gripping his arm. No need for that. I turned my gaze to her, and that's when I smiled. "Why not?" I asked softly. She flinched, her mouth opening to respond, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't have an answer. Because Cynthia had spent years making me feel helpless, like I was imagining things or weak. But I wasn't the weak one now. I folded my arms, tilting my head slightly. "Unless, of course," I added slowly, watching her face darken, "there's a reason you don't want a doctor to examine him." The room fell silent. Cynthia stared at me, and for the first time in all the years I had known her, she looked afraid of me. Cynthia's fear was palpable. Her fingers twitched at her sides as she fought to regain control, but it was slipping fast. James was getting worse by the second. His posture was faltering, his shoulders slumping, his breathing shallow and labored. He gritted his teeth, gripping the counter as though it were his last anchor to reality. But still, he refused to believe what was happening. "I don't need a doctor," he muttered, his voice tight. Just give me a minute." I raised an eyebrow, folding my arms across my chest. "James, you can barely stand. I'm calling an ambulance." I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers hovering over the screen. Cynthia lunged, gripping my wrist with surprising force. "There's no need," she said quickly, her voice tinged with desperation. I didn't react right away. Instead, I studied her, really studied her. Her breathing was uneven, her pupils dilated, and she was shaking, not from worry, but from pure, unfiltered panic. I met her gaze and spoke slowly. "What did you put in his coffee, Cynthia?" The color drained from her face. James's head snapped up, his glassy eyes locking onto his mother. She hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. James exhaled sharply, finally understanding what I had been suggesting all along. His own mother had done something to him. Cynthia shook her head, her mouth opening and closing, scrambling to twist the situation, to manipulate, to lie her way out. But it was too late. I wasn't the naive, obedient daughter-in-law anymore. I yanked my wrist from her grasp and hit call on my phone. Cynthia's panic turned to rage. Her hands slammed onto the table as she leaned forward. "Emily Bennett, stop this. You're making a scene over nothing." I smiled slowly, a knowing grin. "Funny, isn't it?" I said. "That's exactly what James used to say to me when I was the one feeling sick." James stiffened. The words hit him like a slap, like something he had never really considered before. Cynthia's head jerked toward him, her mouth twisting into something almost desperate. "Sweetheart," she soothed. "She's overreacting. You're just exhausted. Let's get you to bed." James flinched away from her for the first time. His mother's touch repulsed him. He didn't trust her anymore. "I don't," he faltered. His voice shook, his body still fighting against whatever she had given him, but the weight of the realization had settled in. He knew. I stepped closer, my voice soft but firm. "You don't feel right, do you?" James shook his head. His usual arrogance was gone. His breathing had become shallow, and his hands were unsteady. The phone rang in my hand, and Cynthia's entire body went rigid. A voice crackled through the speaker. 911. "What's your emergency?" the operator asked. Before Cynthia could rush forward to try and stop me, I turned my back on her and stepped away. "I need an ambulance," I said, my voice clear and confident, ensuring each word was heard. James sagged against the counter, his body swaying as he fought to stay upright. Cynthia's world was crumbling. I could hear her shallow, frantic breaths behind me, but I didn't turn around. I was finished being afraid of her. "This is Emily Bennett," I continued. "My husband drank something at his mother's house, and now he's having difficulty breathing. He feels weak and is sweating heavily." I let my words settle for a moment before adding, I believe he was poisoned." There it was, the truth, raw and exposed for anyone to see. Cynthia collapsed into her chair, a breathless gasp escaping her lips as the realization hit. She was no longer in control. The silence that followed felt endless. Then James, still unsteady, his voice hoarse, finally spoke. "Mom." His voice trembled with betrayal, confusion, and disbelief. "What the hell did you do to me?" Cynthia didn't answer. There was nothing left for her to say. The sirens began to wail in the distance, and I felt a strange satisfaction. For the first time in years, Cynthia was powerless. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the thick, tense air in the room. Cynthia sat frozen, her hands tightly clenched on the table. Her previously perfect composure had completely shattered, replaced with something frantic, something raw. James, pale and drenched in sweat, leaned against the counter, struggling to catch his breath. His body was fighting whatever had been put into him. I stood between them, my phone still in my hand, heart pounding with adrenaline. It was happening. Everything that had built up over the years. The years of being belittled, manipulated, and gaslighted. The years of being told I was weak, that I was imagining things, that I was overreacting. And now, it was James who was facing the truth. The man who had dismissed my suffering, who had sided with his mother time and time again, was now staring at her in shock, the first spark of doubt in his eyes. The first time he had to see her for what she truly was, that realization was terrifying for him. Flashing red and blue lights appeared outside, cutting through the window as the ambulance pulled up. Cynthia's head jerked up. "No," she whispered, almost in disbelief. I turned to face her, calm and steady. "This is happening," I said simply, my words echoing in the stillness. She shook her head, her eyes flicking between me and James, as though she still thought she could fix it, still believed she could regain control. She stood suddenly, her chair screeching loudly against the floor. "Listen to me, Emily Bennett," she hissed, her voice edged with desperation. "If you don't say anything, if you tell them it was just a misunderstanding, then—" I interrupted her, my voice unwavering. "Then you'll keep doing this. Keep getting away with it." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't have an answer, because deep down, she knew. This wasn't the first time. And now, James knew it too. I turned back to him, watching the way his face contorted as the weight of the truth hit him. I didn't need to say a word. All those times I had been sick, all those times he had dismissed me, all the times his mother had played the innocent role while I suffered. He understood it all now, and that understanding was crushing him. The paramedics burst through the front door, rushing toward James. Cynthia staggered back, pressing herself against the wall as if she could disappear into it. "What's his condition?" one of the paramedics asked me, his voice sharp with urgency. "He's dizzy, sweating, disoriented," I replied. "It started about an hour ago, right after he drank his coffee." One paramedic immediately began checking James's vitals, while the other began preparing a stretcher. "What was in the coffee?" the second paramedic asked, looking back at me, already assessing the situation. I met Cynthia's eyes. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. Slowly, I turned back to the paramedic. "I don't know," I said, deliberately loud so everyone could hear. "But his mother made it, specifically for me." The instant those words left my mouth, Cynthia's body tensed. One of the paramedics turned toward her. "Ma'am, is that true?" She didn't respond. I watched as she tried to find a way out, a lie to escape, but there was no way out this time. James, hoarse and trembling, finally spoke. His words would change everything. "Mom?" He swallowed hard, the weight of realization starting to settle in. "What did you do to me?" Cynthia flinched, as if he had physically slapped her. The paramedics had already begun lifting James onto the stretcher. One of them turned to me. "He needs to be transported immediately. Are you riding with him?" Without a second thought, I nodded. "Yes." Cynthia stepped forward in a final, desperate attempt to hold on to some fragment of control. "Wait," she said, almost pleading. I turned to face her, my expression cold and unreadable. "You should probably get a lawyer," I said, and then I walked out the door, leaving her standing there, helpless. The sterile scent of the hospital filled my nose as we entered, a sharp blend of antiseptic and something metallic hanging in the air. The beeping of machines echoed around us, each sound a reminder of how close James had come to something irreversible. I sat in the corner of the emergency room, watching as doctors worked quickly, checking his vitals, running tests, asking questions. James lay motionless on the bed, his skin ashen, his body weak from whatever poison had been in that coffee. But his eyes were open now, and for the first time in years, they were focused on me. Not with indifference, not with arrogance, but with something else entirely. Something that looked a lot like guilt. A doctor approached, ready to assess the next step. His face remained expressionless as the doctor flipped through a chart. "Mr. Thompson, your test results show elevated levels of a toxic compound, commonly found in prescription sedatives. We're fortunate you didn't ingest a higher amount." James swallowed hard, his discomfort palpable. The doctor turned to me. "You mentioned your mother prepared the coffee?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, she made it for me, but James drank it instead." The doctor's eyes darkened with a deeper understanding. "We'll have to report this to the authorities. Cases like this don't go unnoticed." James's eyes closed tightly as his fists clenched into the hospital sheets. The reality of what was unfolding was settling in. The doctor gave me a small nod before stepping away, leaving us alone in a heavy, suffocating silence. After what felt like an eternity, James spoke. His voice was strained. "I didn't know." I exhaled slowly, leaning back into the chair, looking up at the ceiling. "Didn't you?" His jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffening. "I didn't expect you to admit it," I said, almost bitterly. Apologies from James were a rarity, and I wasn't holding my breath for one now. Still, for the first time, he couldn't bring himself to meet my eyes. The weight of years of silence, of ignored pain, settled between us. "How long?" I asked softly, my voice barely a whisper. James's brow furrowed, a trace of confusion crossing his face. "What?" I kept my tone even, calm, though inside I was trembling. "How long have you known that something wasn't right? That this, everything, wasn't normal?" He hesitated, the words clearly a struggle. And then, just for a moment, a flicker of something crossed his face. Recognition. Regret. I'd seen that look before. It was the moment of realization, the one I'd waited for all these years. Deep down, James had always known. Maybe he hadn't seen it as clearly as I did, but he'd witnessed the signs. The way I was always sick, how his mother acted, and the way he rationalized it. He'd convinced himself it was all just coincidence. To admit otherwise meant facing the truth that his mother was capable of this, and that he had ignored it for far too long. And James hated being wrong. He parted his lips, as though he wanted to speak, but closed them again. What could he say? That he was sorry? That he regretted all the years of turning his back on me? That he wished he had listened? I knew it didn't matter anymore. I sighed, glancing out the window at the distant city lights. "You always took her side," I murmured, more to myself than to him. James flinched, barely perceptible. "You thought I was overreacting," I continued, my voice growing colder. "That I was being dramatic, that I was just making things up for attention." I shook my head slowly, the truth stinging as it passed my lips. "You never believed me." His breath hitched. "Emily Bennett, no." My voice was firm, unwavering. "Don't say my name like that, not anymore." He twisted his face, but this time he didn't argue. He knew I was right. Just then, the door creaked open, and a nurse stepped inside. "Mr. Thompson, a detective is here to speak with you." James's posture stiffened. The moment of truth had arrived. Everything he had ignored, everything he had brushed aside, was finally catching up to him. The door swung open fully, and Detective Lily Carter stepped inside. She was a middle-aged woman with piercing eyes and an aura of quiet authority. A notebook rested in one hand, and a voice recorder was held tightly in the other. It was clear she had a job to do, and she wasn't going to let anything get in the way of it. James barely lifted his head, defeated. He was physically drained, the poison working through his body, the same poison meant for me. I remained seated in the corner, arms crossed, my heartbeat steady, steady as a drumbeat that only I could hear. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Lily Carter addressed him, her voice crisp, professional. "I understand you experienced a reaction to something in your drink?" James swallowed again, his throat tight. He looked at me first, almost like he was seeking permission. I met his gaze without hesitation. For years, he had watched his mother destroy me, silently supporting her, and now, as the roles were reversed, he was looking to me for protection. But this time, I wouldn't save him. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. He turned back to the detective, his jaw clenching. "Yeah," he muttered. Something was off about the coffee. The detective nodded and flipped open her notebook. "Your wife informed us that your mother prepared the coffee specifically for her. You drank it by mistake, is that right?" Silence fell, heavy and thick. James's eyes darted to the floor, caught in a war between truth and deception. The truth meant betraying his mother. The lie meant betraying himself. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally exhaled. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's right." Detective Lily Carter jotted something down. "Has this happened before?" More silence. I tilted my head slightly, challenging him with my gaze. "James," I urged softly, "say it's the first time. Say it was just a mistake. Tell her you had no idea." His fingers twitched nervously on the blanket. He knew he couldn't lie his way out of this. Not this time. Not when his mother had gotten away with too much already. James rubbed his face with both hands. "I don't know," he muttered. "I mean, Emily Bennett's been sick before, but I thought—" I let out a soft, bitter laugh, shaking my head. "You thought what?" His face turned a deep shade of red as he struggled with his shame. I knew. He knew I knew. Detective Lily Carter's eyes sharpened as she leaned in. Mr. Thompson, your medical records show no pre-existing conditions that would explain your symptoms. However, your wife has had several emergency room visits over the last few years with similar symptoms. Do you understand what I'm implying? James stayed silent, trapped between the undeniable truth and the lie that would expose his failure. This was the moment. He had to decide, himself or the mother who had poisoned me, who had controlled him for far too long. I leaned forward, my voice cold but unwavering. You always knew something was wrong. You knew it was happening to me, but you ignored it, because it wasn't happening to you. His breathing was shaky now, but I wasn't finished. Every time I got sick, every time I was stuck in a hospital bed, fighting for my life, just like you are now, you told me it was nothing. You laughed at me. You made me think I was crazy, I said, leaning closer, my voice as sharp as steel. But now you believe me. James closed his eyes, his silence speaking volumes. He had no defense because I was right. Detective Lily Carter didn't allow the moment to linger. She snapped her notebook shut with a quick motion. We'll need to speak with your mother. Officers are already en route to her house. If she tries to leave, she'll be taken into custody. Cynthia, the puppet master, the woman who had controlled every aspect of my marriage, whispering venom into James's ear just as she had poisoned me. But now, she was caught. Mr. Thompson, Detective Lily Carter continued, her voice professional, unyielding. Do you want to press charges? James hesitated, his mind caught between guilt and a twisted loyalty. And for the first time in our marriage, he turned to me, as if I had the answer, as if I was the one who should decide. Maybe, once upon a time, I would have protected him. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I stood, smoothing down my jacket, my eyes steady on him. That's not my call, Detective, I said. It's James's. He looked at me with pleading, regretful eyes, weak, almost begging. I gave him nothing, no sympathy, no compassion. The man who had stood by and let his mother destroy me was no longer my responsibility. The detective nodded, her gaze shifting toward James. We'll be back with more questions once we have her in custody. In the meantime, Mr. Thompson, I'd suggest you think very carefully about your next steps. With that, she turned on her heel and left the room. I followed, not sparing a glance behind me, not waiting for James's excuses or his empty apologies. I knew, as soon as I stepped out that door, with complete certainty, that I wasn't coming back. Cynthia might have been the one slipping poison into my coffee, but James, he had been letting her do it all along. And that was unforgivable. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. I smiled, because this wasn't just the end of a poisoning plot. This was the end of my marriage.